888-971 SAGE 888-971-7243. Sean Hannity under fire for not disclosing his so-called relationship with Michael Cohen, President Trump's private lawyer. Robert Mueller has issued a warning. Many of the news stories you're hearing about the Russia-Trump probe are flat out wrong. What story was he referring to? But first, I want to say something about the announcement by Paul Ryan that he's not going to run for re-election. I know that's not top of the news anymore. But I'm watching the reaction, especially on MSNBC. Joy Reid, one of their hosts, and another guest just ripped into him. Just ripped into him. Cold, selfish, mean-spirited, Ayn Randian. I'll play that for you in just a second. Now, this is on the left. And on the right, you have people like Dr. Sebastian Gorka, who is essentially cheered the fact that Paul Ryan is not going to run again and will not be the Speaker of the House. Feels that Paul Ryan is part of the quote-unquote establishment. And a number of people have said that. Include me out about calling people like Paul Ryan part of the establishment, whatever the hell that means. This is the guy, Paul Ryan. He's a nightshade guy. He's a guy who knows the numbers. He knows the nuts. He knows the bolts. He knows the budget like nobody's business. He can talk to you about the debt and the deficit with the facility of an accountant. He's got an amazing mind. And he is a proponent of limited government. He believes in Article 1, Section 8. This is a guy who ran as vice president just what? A few years ago. He was Romney's running mate just 6 years ago. Now, from that point, he's now become establishment. We throw him out like he's trash. He's young. He's smart. He works hard. He's bright. He's articulate. He's good on television. And as I said to Dr. Gorka, I said, the problem is he's herding cats. And Gorka said, well, his job is to herd cats. Really? Really? Look at the divisions within the Republican Party. How many of them do not truly believe in Article 1, Section 8? What do you suppose would have actually happened in the real world had President Trump vetoed that omnibus bill? Have a lot of Republicans now saying, I wish he had vetoed it. I wish he had vetoed it. Okay, suppose he had. Then what would you have done? Where would you have cut? This is the problem. David Stockman was Ronald Reagan's head of office in management and budget. And he came in, as did a bunch of other young Turks during the Reagan early time, the Reagan Revolution. They were going to get government down to the size that the founding fathers intended. And one special program after another was salvaged after the special interest beneficiary came in and made his or her case. And David Stockman left and wrote a book in which he talked about how disappointed he was that these special interests had so much power. And ideologically, they're all over the place. There ought to be at least one thing that they could agree on, which is to get rid of the minimum wage. And during the campaign, both Rick Santorum and Ben Carson said they wanted a minimum wage. What? And during the debate over Obamacare, you had people like John Cornyn, the senator from Texas, who said, let's keep some of the good parts of Obamacare. You know, like making sure that insurance companies can't decline you if you have pre-existing. What? That turns the whole concept of insurance on its head. Insurance is about protecting against unknown risk, not known ones. And here is a Republican saying, let's keep that good part. Come on. During the campaign, Donald Trump said, when asked, name the three most important functions of government, he said, national security, which is correct. And then he said education and health care. Not at the federal level, no. How many Republicans had a problem with that? Not very many. He wants to spend varying amounts of money. I'm not quite sure how much of it is now for a infrastructure program. When Obama did it, we called it pork because it was pork. It didn't work. And what did Obama later on say? Well, I later on found out there's no such thing as a shovel-ready job. Having spent all that money. And you're blaming Paul Ryan for not being able to craft some sort of policy around people with those kinds of differences? Do you remember when George W. Bush praised his father's 10th year anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act? A monstrosity of an intrusion into the private sector that caused people with so-called handicaps or challenges to have an even greater difficulty getting a job, because now that the ADA was passed, employers fear that if they hired somebody with a handicap and the person didn't work out, they'd be sued. So people with handicaps had a greater problem getting a job than before. And here you have George W. Bush praising it on his dad's 10th anniversary. A, his dad signed it, and B, his son praised it. And did anybody complain about that? So here's the problem. And when George W. Bush briefly campaigned and talked about privatizing a tiny amount of Social Security, and of course they can't use the P word, privatize, Nancy Pelosi said he handed us a gift because we used it against him. He was a really lovely man, but he made a political tactical mistake. He handed us a gift, Nancy Pelosi said. Now, why would that be a gift unless Republicans do not back the idea that it's your money, not the government's? Maybe you can invest it far better than can the government. They don't believe that. Or they're afraid of voters who don't believe it, and it's all about getting reelected. And old people vote. So the politicians are all afraid to do anything. Never mind, George W. Bush said, anybody 55 or older will not have anything touched. They still didn't believe it. And the Republicans ran from him like he had a disease. And you're blaming Paul Ryan for not being able to figure that out? The only real way of repealing and replacing, which is that silly slogan Republicans used a whole bunch of times, is to replace it with the free market. And you can't soundbite that. That means we have way too many regulations right now. Way too many people are foreclosed from getting into health care who otherwise would be able to perform just fine. And that wasn't even on the table. Do Republicans truly believe in free markets? Do you really believe that healthcare is a commodity like a sweater or like a car or like an egg? No, they don't. Many Republicans believe, as Democrats do, that healthcare is a right. It is not. And you're blaming Paul Ryan for not being able to craft some sort of coherent policy out of that? I don't get it. John Kasich, Republican governor, I'm okay. I'll expand Medicaid to put all these people on the rolls of Medicaid under Obamacare. I'll do that. Many Republican governors didn't, but this one did. And this is an important state for Republicans to win. Most Americans do not want Social Security privatized. Most Americans like Medicare. And I think most Americans even like the federal involvement in welfare. Or at least way too many Republicans do for a Republican president to run on doing something about entitlement program and getting the government down to the size it ought to be. How many people are aware that in 1900 government at all three levels took less than 10% from the American people? I told you I got fact-checked on that because I mentioned it on CNN, and the fact-checker couldn't believe it. It was true. And right now, government takes about 35% at all three levels. That is a massive growth in 100 years. And when you put some value on unfunded mandates, government takes almost half of our money. It is an outrage. How many Republicans are really outraged about it? How many Republican politicians are? They won't be unless the people are outraged by it, because we get the government we vote for. If the American people were truly outraged by how much money government is taking, they do something about it. And when you don't do something about it, when half the government is Democrat and you have people who are leaders like Warren and Bernie Sanders, and you have people on the other side like Paul Ryan who are called establishment just because they can't get Republicans to agree on downsizing the government to the degree that he ought to, it is a recipe for gridlock. And you're blaming Paul Ryan. I don't know why anybody would want that job. 888-971-SAG. When I come back, I'm going to talk to you about this business of going after Sean Hannity. It's an outrage. I'm Larry Elder.